So, good afternoon and welcome to this debate of Florence School of Regulation. Today, the topic is national policies coping with energy crisis and climate targets, the case of Italy. I have to apologize because the video at the beginning should have had some sound. At least I couldn't hear it, but the images, I think, gives you the flavor of the activities and of this debate series. So without further ado, let me just say that this FSR debate is organized in cooperation with the International Energy Agency. They will present the reports, but for all of this, I'll now pass the screen to my colleague Ilaria Conti, who will be open and introduce the activity of this event. Ilaria.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Alberto, for the introduction. Yes, welcome everybody to this first FSR online debate. This, as Alberto said, is a special one because it's jointly organized with our colleagues from the IEA, from International Energy Agency. And so I would like first of all, to thank them for reaching out to us and for proposing this interesting debate. What are we going to discuss today is, in fact, a publication of the International Energy Agency. It's the Energy Policies Review Report for Italy, which indeed analyzes the climate and energy policies that Italy put in place recently, and particularly in response to the energy crisis and to the climate goals. So something that, as you know, the Florence School of Regulation follows very closely at European level, the response of Europe and of several member states to the energy crisis, which hit a couple of years ago, in the last 2 years, and also the decarbonization objectives that Europe is pursuing. So it will be very interesting today to understand, to focus on a special case, on a national case, and see how Italy in particular is responding to this challenging. And maybe we can learn from this example and understand better what are really these difficult challenges for many countries in Europe and worldwide. So I'm going to introduce our main speaker, Alessio Scanziani from the Strategic Initiatives Office at the International Energy Agency. He is going to present the main findings of this report. And this is something I think very worth highlighting. He has also integrated the presentation with some novelties coming from yesterday's publication of another important report from the IEA, which is the Net Zero Roadmap, which has been updated since its first publication in 2021. So very interesting and very to the point. After that, we will have Clara Poletti, commissioner from the Italian regulator from ARERA and chair of the board of regulators at ACER, for a comment. She will provide the regulatory perspective to the IEA presentation. And then in the second part of the debate, we will have a panel debate, which will be moderated by Alberto. So we will hear from other representatives of the industry and so from our donors, from the donors of the school. I would like to now give the floor to Alessio. All the participants are welcome to, of course, start already using the Q&A box, because later on you will also have the opportunity to ask questions to the panelists and to Alessio, of course. Thank you very much. And Alessio, please, you have the floor.
Here I am. Sorry for the wait. So good afternoon from the IEA headquarters in Paris. And thank you for the invitation to speak about the IEA Energy Policy Review of Italy. Let me also thank my colleagues, Ivana Capozza, Dagmar Graczyk, Ad van Boemen, Ambassador Douglas Hangel, who had leading roles at different stages of the preparation of the report, and Silvia Beyer, who organized this meeting with the Florence School of Regulation. My presentation will mostly focus on the key findings from the Energy Policy Review of Italy, But at the end, I will also give a quick overview of global energy trends with some very interesting points from the most recent update to the IEA Net Zero Roadmap, launched just yesterday, as Ilaria has anticipated. So, as we can see in the chart, greenhouse gas emissions have peaked in Italy in 2005 and then started a bumpy decrease, mainly led by decreasing emissions from electricity generation, which is in the blue part of the chart. In 2022, emissions were 22% lower than in 1990, which is a good news. However, this is not enough. Strong action mitigating climate change should be high on Italy's agenda. August 2023 was the worst hottest month, just after July 23. Recent extreme weather events experienced by Italy, such as floods, fires, and record high temperatures, are just the latest alarm bell of the effects of climate change on the fragile Italian landscape. Average temperature in the country is rising at a faster pace than the world average, and the effects are more and more visible. So while Italy is on track to reach the non-ETS emission reductions and energy efficiency targets set in the first draft of the National Energy and Climate Plan for 2030, the plan has recently been updated to support the European Fit for 55 package, increasing the ambition in all sectors. In the slide, we can see that the historical greenhouse gas emission data and the recent projection from the Italian Environment Protection Agency that show that without new policy measures, Italy is far from achieving the targets. These are the EU-wide targets of reducing emissions by 55% by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. Given its fragile and precious landscape, which you can well appreciate while being in Florence, Italy should have strong ambition in aiming to reduce emissions in all sectors, especially from energy, that accounts for 80% of total emissions. So we'll now go through the main Italian energy sectors in decreasing order of greenhouse gas emissions. So the first sector is transport, that accounts for almost 1/4 of total greenhouse gas emissions. Energy demand from transport fell significantly in 2020 due to the pandemic, but has rebounded strongly since mid-2021. Preliminary data for 2022 show a further rebound by 5% with respect to 2021. As you see in the figure, energy consumption in transport is still dominated by oil. The government expects oil consumption to decline notably over the medium and long terms as a result of policy to promote alternative fuels for passenger cars. The IEA commends the strong efforts of the government to promote the uptake of biofuels, and particularly biomethane in the transport sector, but more effort is needed on electric vehicles. While there are plans to expand the charging infrastructure for electric vehicles, the overall rollout of EVs and infrastructure is well behind other countries in Europe. Italy should follow up on its target to increase the number of EVs to around 6 million by 2030, up from 350,000 in 2022, and install 21,000 ultra-fast chargers by the same year. As the figure on the right shows, the challenge is significant, and policies need to keep sustaining the growth of EVs, especially as data shows sales of EVs in 2022 at a lower level than 2021. The second sector for greenhouse gas emissions is electricity generation, accounting for around 1/5 of the total. Electricity generation in Italy is dominated by natural gas, with a fluctuating contribution from hydro depending on water availability. For example, 2022 was a bad year, but 2023 seems better so far. Cogeneration was decreasing up to 2021, in line with the government's target of phasing out coal by 2025. In 2022, however, coal rebounded to ensure electricity supply, while hydro was scarce and natural gas supply and prices are affected by Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The government, however, confirmed the goal to phase out coal by 2025. To satisfy demand, Italy imports electricity for a relevant share of its domestic needs. In 2022, imports covered 15% of electricity demand. The share of renewables strongly increased from 2010 to 2014, thanks to generous PV incentives, but then they have almost stagnated. Since 2022, however, renewables got more impulse, but their growth is still limited by bottlenecks in permitting procedures, as we will discuss in the next slides. The government set in the updated NSCP a target to reach 65% of electricity covered by renewables by 2030, up from 35% in 2022. Between 2014 and 2020, Italy added less than 6 gigawatts of new renewable capacity, and solar PV accounted for half of this. Capacity additions have started to pick up again following encouraging changes to the regulatory framework in 2021. And in 2022, around 3 gigawatts of renewable power was installed in the country, which is a strong increase. But it is much lower than the rate needed to achieve the new target of 65% renewable electricity by 2030. As you see in the figure, application in the pipeline, awaiting connection, accepting connection, under evaluation and approved, are in principle more than enough to achieve the new targets. However, long permitting procedure, high administrative burden, and increasing local opposition block projects from moving rightwards in the chart and obtaining the connection contract to be delivered to the market. Long procedures also slow down work on the distribution and transmission grids, which are the backbone of the clean energy transition and need to be strengthened in a system that is going to have higher share of distributed generation. It is important to incentivize regions which are in the lead of granting permits to deliver their contribution and accelerate the country's energy transition. Another challenge for Italy is the considerable regional disparity between renewable electricity generation and load centers. As you see in the slide, most of new applications are concentrated in the south. At the same time, large part of electricity demand is concentrated in the north of the country. This complicates the management of electricity flows along the national transmission and distribution grids. Once more, the government should place a strong focus on grids, simplifying permitting procedures and involving local communities to gain support on the projects. The Terna 2023 development plan includes the Hyperloop network project that aims to strengthen the national transmission grid to increase transport capacity from south to north. The IEA strongly welcomed this project, and maybe Mr. Bulgarelli might add more details in it. At the IEA, we are going to launch a new report in the following weeks, focused on electricity grids and their central role in the energy transition, with plenty of suggestions for member countries and Italy. So stay tuned. Let's now turn to buildings that account for another fifth of Italian greenhouse gas emissions. We can see the natural gas has a central role in buildings as well. Electrification is not progressing significantly, and total demand is roughly stable. Early data for 2022 show a decrease of consumption from buildings, likely due to warmer weather in winter. The most important recent measure in the Italian building sector is the so-called Superbonus 110%, providing a 110% tax break for certain interventions improving energy efficiency and safety of buildings. While achieving substantial energy savings, the scheme came with a high cost, and the government recently scaled it back. In our report, we recommended to revise the scheme, maximizing the energy savings per euro spent, and the scope and the wide scope of the scheme allowed tax breaks for intervention with limited effect on energy efficiency. Also, frequent changes to the regulatory framework reduce the market certainty, and the desire of many people to perform works in a short time frame contributed to tighten the market of the workforce and materials, leading to surging prices. In addition, despite the government's effort to introduce instruments to favor the participation of everyone to the scheme, a measure providing a high break for everyone frequently ends up being regressive, as it is of easier access for the wealthier who have the possibility to advance the capital and higher taxes to be deducted. So this is part of a larger discussion about the response to energy crisis from Italy and many other governments. Last year, the government provided generalized discount to electricity and gas bills and to transport fuels. Italy also made some changes to the bonus for vulnerable consumers, and I know that Ms. Poletti will present more on this. The increase of the budget of energy bonuses for most vulnerable households was little and limited with respect to the resources allocated for generalized discounts. As we did for other countries, we recommended to Italy to better target the relief measures, highlighting the opportunity to use the saved resources for investments to advance the energy transition. Also, an effective way to help vulnerable consumers is facilitating their access to support for energy efficiency improvement. Increased efficiency of homes is a win-win solution, reducing bills and helping with the transition. Let me now spend some more time on energy security, especially focusing on gas. 2022 was unfortunately characterized by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with the well-known consequences on the energy sector and specifically on natural gas markets. The role of natural gas in the Italian energy system is particularly high, as we have seen earlier. Over the last decade, Italy has diversified its gas supply routes and sources, increased the flows through the existing LNG terminals, and extended the pipeline of import infrastructure, for example, with the tap connection to gas from Azerbaijan. And this now helps to ease the country's dependence on Russian gas, which was reduced from 38% of total imports in the fourth quarter of 2021 to around only 4% in the same quarter of 2022. Many factors contributed to ensure the gas supply-demand balance in 2022. Increased supply from North Europe, Algeria, and Azerbaijan, higher use of LNG terminals, and energy savings stemming from mild weather, lower use in industry, mostly because of high prices, and behavioral changes in the residential sector. As a result, gas storage levels stayed high during the 22-23 winter, and gas is now 95% full, already surpassing the EU target of reaching 90% in November. Looking ahead, Italy has already advanced with further diversification of gas supply. The new floating storage and regasification unit in Piombino received its first cargo on 8th of July 23, and the second FSRU has been approved to be built in Ravenna. This new infrastructure will help to achieve Italia's target to phase out the use of Russian gas by 2025. However, in the longer term, a reduction of natural gas consumption through accelerated diversification to renewables and a stronger focus on energy efficiency will not only further strengthen Italian energy security, but also help the country meet its emission reduction targets and lower energy bills. So here I show the key recommendation to the Italian government from our report. This is a selection of over 50 specific recommendations for all energy sectors that we gave to the government and are published in the whole report, which is, by the way, available for free on the IEA website. In the time span between our visit, the publication and the report, and today, the government has already taken some steps to address many of these recommendations. For example, the updated NSCP has been submitted to the EU with higher ambition on its renewable energy targets. On permitting, some legislative steps have already simplified the procedures. Some more consideration should be given to ensuring adequate staff, resources, and technical instruments for the institutions involved in the permitting process. The tax deduction scheme have been modified, but rather with the goal to save resources than to save more energy. More effort is also still needed in addressing energy poverty. For example, focuses the resources on improving energy efficiency for vulnerable consumers to help them reduce their bills. And the transport sector, the first one for greenhouse gas emissions, needs a strong focus with a clear strategy to achieve and even overshoot the 2030 targets of 6 million EVs on the road. So, as promised, let's now take a quick view at global trends with some key findings from the update of the IEA Net Zero Roadmap published yesterday. Energy sector CO2 emissions remain morally high at the global level, reaching a new record of 37 gigatons in 2022. Instead of starting to fall, demand for fossil fuels has increased. However, there's been a strong decrease of projected emissions in 2030, as you see on the slide, thanks to a strong progress capacity for solar PV, wind, and electric vehicles. As you can see in the charts on the right, EV sales and PV capacity additions are literally booming around the world. This is a great news. The speed of the rollout of key clean energy technology means that the IEA now projects that demand for coal, oil, and natural gas will all peak this decade, even without new climate policies. This is encouraging, but not nearly enough to reach the 1.5 degree goal. So, what needs to be done? Efficiency renewables are key. Tripling global installed capacity to 11,000 gigawatts by 2030 provides the largest emission reduction in 2030 in the net zero emission scenario. And doubling the annual rate of energy intensity improvement by 2030, the net zero scenario saves the energy equivalent of all oil consumption in road transport today, reduces emissions, boosts energy security, and improves affordability. Electrification, starting from EVs and heat pumps, and cutting methane emissions are also essential to keep the 1.5 scenario alive. Technological advances are processing fast and supporting the transition. When the report was first published in 2021, half of technologies needed to achieve net zero were not yet on the market. In the 2023 update, the share of technologies needed but not yet on the market decreased to 35%. So this is another good news. Infrastructure such as electricity grids needs to be greatly improved, as well as CCUS, hydrogen, and sustainable bioenergy. In the net zero scenario, energy security issues do not disappear, but shift from fossil fuels to the material and processes needed for the transition. Total demand for critical minerals triples by 2030 in the net zero scenario. Mining, processing, material production, and technology manufacturing are strongly concentrated in a handful of countries, notably in China, as you can see in the slide. As highlighted by our executive director yesterday at the launch of the updated roadmap, the current geopolitical fragmentation among countries in the world is very worrying. Climate change affects citizens of all countries, and it should be enough to put apart geopolitical tensions and enhance international collaboration. These reports, the Net Zero report, provides a route for the world to reach net zero. Each country has its own route, but there is no route to net zero without fair and equitable international collaboration among countries in the world. So with this, I thank you all for your attention and give the floor back to Florence.
Many thanks, Alessio. It was a very, very interesting presentation, lots of interesting data, and I'm sure that they will be picked up during the debate by our panelists and maybe also by our participants in the debate. Thank you so much. I would move now to the next presentation of today's debate from Clara Poletti. Let's see if Clara, yes, I see Clara and I can hear you now.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Sure.
Thank you, Ilaria. Thank you for the very, very interesting, comprehensive presentation. The presentation, I think, was very clear in showing that when we look at climate change, the competence and the focus of energy regulators is really just a part, maybe a big part of a bigger picture. We are responsible for somehow the efficiency and the integration of wholesale energy markets. We have competencies on infrastructures, customers, retail markets, but overall, the policies, the portfolio of policies is much wider. And why I'm mentioning this is because as regulators, we really need clear objectives, strategies. We need to understand where we want to go and how we want to get there in order to be able to support the transition process in an efficient way. And that raises questions on how the governance overall of the system can be improved. But this is not the topic I want to address today, but just wanted to make clear that I'm going to look only at a small part of the overall very big discussion. And even on energy, electricity and gas, there are so many things going on. The time is short, so I'm going to focus just on before describing you the issues about affordability and the tools, just to focus a bit on infrastructures, because I know that there is a lot of debate on infrastructures and whether the regulatory framework is fit for purpose. We need to develop especially electricity infrastructures. Is our regulatory framework fit for that? I think it's fair to say that we have to improve a lot. We have to improve on how we define our network development plans, to integrate them. We have to improve on integrating scenarios. We have to improve in the way we measure cost and benefits. But let me say that the development of networks is not enough. We have to keep a more comprehensive approach where performance gets at the ground of our regulatory framework. We really need to make sure that all the possible tools are optimized together. Just one example, flexibility. We have launched in Italy, we have already launched pilot projects on flexibility at distribution level. Why? Because we have problems in some cities with congestions in a few hours. It wouldn't make sense to just invest in additional grids in town in order to solve that type of problems. We have problems with voltage regulation, so we have to develop new tools and to integrate the development of the grid. The grid is not enough. On connections, for sure we need to rethink and simplify our connection procedures. Some numbers were shown, but when we look at the days timing for connection today, still I see that the timing for the technical connection is only a small part of the overall timing. Here again, we are working, a provision was approved before the summer, and now we are going to approve new procedure at distribution level to connect, and we are aiming at simplifying, making the system more digital, so easier to use. So we'll do our part, but for sure that's not going to be enough. At transmission level, in our view, the problem is more the coordination between authorization and the technical connection. And here, really, we need a change in attitude. We need to stop thinking that authorization is not my problem as regulator and as transmission system operator. We have to be proactive in following all the authorization procedures for these big projects. And we have really to make an effort to shorten the timing, even if it's not strictly our responsibility. Now, just I would like to use my time, what is left of my time, to address and to give you some numbers on tools that have been in use for a while in Italy on to support, let's say, customers on socioeconomic needs. Can you move to the next slide, please? Okay, we have been working on that for a long time, and I must say that I'm pretty proud of what we have, and this is why I decided to present it, because sometimes I have the feeling that things are not really well known. The main principles of our support mechanism is selectivity. So customers that are eligible are defined on the basis of a socioeconomic index. We have not decided the socioeconomic index, and for sure that could be improved. It's a weighted average. It's not just a revenue, it's capital as well. So this is the index we use for, in general, for welfare policies. Efficiency. The bonus doesn't depend, it's independent of individual consumption. It's a sort of lump sum. So it gives all the incentives to consumers to reduce consumption and to buy at a lower cost. And fairness, in the sense that the responsibility for setting the threshold and of this index, socioeconomic index, is on the government, and the regulator, we are only managing the system. Next slide, please. The bonus, once you are eligible, the amount of money you get depends on an estimate of the overall average bill, and is an average discount. So that's only the way it's calculated. It's a lump sum, but the objective is to discount by 30% the average bill on electricity and 50% discount for gas. It depends. It's higher for families with more children, and for gas it depends on the climate zone. So if you live in a colder neighborhood, you get more money, and it is higher if you use gas for heating as well. Next slide, please. Here, what you see that we have improved the system by making it automatic, depending on the economic situation of the family. So if you are eligible, then you, without asking for the bonus, you get it in your bill. And this is why the number of beneficiaries has increased so much in 2021. And what you see for 2022 and 2023, that's an estimate, is the number of beneficiaries after during the crash, the price emergency, let's say, the number goes up because the threshold was higher, the socioeconomic index, and because the bill was higher and the protection was increased. So overall, the government decided to use this mechanism that was already in place to strengthen the protection for families. Of course, you cannot sum up gas and electricity because almost all families have an electricity contract, but many families do not have a gas contract because they don't use gas. So you cannot sum them up, but the total number is probably closer to the electricity numbers. Next slide, please. When the government decided to increase the protection, they gave an additional contribution. So they increased the lump sum with the objective of keeping the total bill at the level where it was before the price emergency. So you see the blue bars, they stay almost flat because of the support. So vulnerable customers didn't see the price increase. That's more or less what it happened. This is for electricity, but we have the bonus gas as well. Other customers, you see the other bar, they had experienced a very sharp increase in prices. But here, the numbers you see are they take into consideration some other support health measures and this, that the government put in place, because the government decided to finance via public budget what we call general system charges. You can imagine the general system charges as the money, the levies that are applied to finance renewables. Those charges are applied to domestic customers as well as to other customers. So even though the general system charges were reduced, the non-vulnerable customers, they experienced a very sharp increase in prices. Let me just mention that, in my opinion, the reduction of general system charges should not be seen as a support to families. It's just something that should be structural, because this is a distortion. They were taking away a distortion, and that should not go back in our bills. Next slide, please. So lesson learned. I think in order to have a dynamic and flexible system, you need really to work on the interoperability of the billing system with the socioeconomic database. This is not easy at all, given the GDPR even more. You need to have a forward-looking and dynamic approach, and this is what we are trying to do, to improve the way we define the value of the bonus. We need to revise the way that social bonus is financed, and there is an opportunity here to think for the future whether having separate bonus for electricity and gas does still make sense, because probably more and more customers are changing the way they heat their homes. Thank you. I stop here. Happy to answer questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Clara. Very clear, as usual. Very interesting presentation, also for bringing us up to date to the recent developments in Italy and the recent regulation applying, coming into force in this very particular period. Thank you so much. We will now open the second part of the debate, and then I give the floor to the moderator, who is Alberto Toshnik.
Thank you, Daria, and excellent start of the debate with two very interesting presentations. Now we have three distinguished commentators. We have Giulia Branzi, the head of climate policies at SNAM, the Italian gas transmission system operator. We have Fabio Bulgarelli, director of regulatory affairs at Terna, the Italian electricity transmission system operator. And then we have Claudia Squeglia, senior vice president in public affairs at Eni, I think the Italian-based international energy company group. So they will be providing an initial feedback to what they've heard. We have two transmission system operators, one energy group. And then I encourage everybody else attending this debate to post questions on the Q&A. We already have one, but more, so that we can use those questions for giving additional opportunities to our speakers and panelists to elaborate on what was presented and what will be said now. So I will start with Giulia Branzi. Giulia, the floor is yours for maybe 4 or 5 minutes, maybe 6, for an initial tour, the tablet, and then we'll have a further opportunity to comment and cross-comment later on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alberto, for having me here in this session, and thank you for the very interesting presentations that we had so far. So from the gas TSO point of view, the comments I could make are around the levers to decarbonize the gas grids into the future when it comes to policy. So I believe there are 3 main areas that we could potentially see already some positive developments in terms of policy at national level. The first one is hydrogen. So EU hydrogen legislation is almost in place. We are looking to have the gas package adopted by the end of the year, beginning of next year. And that would set the framework, the broader framework that would ideally need to be implemented in a prompt way, because for hydrogen markets, which is a nascent market, the clarity on how the infrastructure is going to be regulated, remunerated, how the risk is going to be allocated across the value chain, it's something very important and needs to be clarified as soon as the legislation is available. So there are a number of other things that could be done to promote hydrogen. And one aspect relates to certification. We do have certification rules for RFMBOs at EU level. We do not have certification rules for other types of renewable hydrogen, and this is something that can be addressed at national policy level. And we do not have rules for certification of low carbon hydrogen. Then clearly, all that relates to certification, and the clarity on certification would enable broadening the market and fastening the ramp-up phase. Another aspect is in relation to the contribution of hydrogen to flexibility of the energy systems as a whole. So we're talking about, so Clara was talking about sector integration before. So this is an aspect that we're just starting to see developing discussions at, for example, ENSO's levels, when the discussion is around the cost-benefit analysis, how it should be structured, what are the right metrics that should be introduced to account for this feature that hydrogen has. The other aspect is biomethane. In Italy, we are actually quite at a good stage. We do have a new incentive decrees that should be enabling new investment and allocations through the recovery and resilience plan. Other things that could be done at policy level, again, is around the valuation of negative emissions, so the biogenic CO2, which is something that isn't addressed at EU level yet, but could be addressed at national level and would clearly enable the business case for biomethane. And yeah, like we were saying with hydrogen before, as soon as you enable the business case for production, you give a spur to the development of the market as a whole. And in relation to mobility, that was a point that was raised in the presentation by the IEA. So biomethane could have a big role in mobility, clearly within the the perimeter that is allowed at EU level. So potentially on heavy duty transport. So we're seeing legislation finalizing now at EU level. That could be an aspect that could be pursued at national level. And the very last one, and then I'll leave the floor to the other speakers, is around CCS, so CCUS actually, because we are looking for the EU to publish a strategy later this year. What could be done in parallel is at national level to have the development of a framework setting out financiable and bankable business models across the board. So across the capture, transport, storage, and usage. So also legislation on usage, promoting this, the development of this value chain would be an important level to support CCUS. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Thank you for bringing in the discussion also the molecules, which the clean molecules, which have not sort of focused much in the previous presentation. The next one is Fabio Bulgarelli. So we move from gas transmission system operator to electricity transmission system operator. Fabio, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Alberto, and thanks for the invitation. Thanks Florence School for organizing this event, this webinar. I would like to focus on two main topics. The first one is how renewable development is going in Italy, and regarding this, I will highlight two IEA recommendations I totally agree with: the necessity to quickly implement a further reform of permitting procedures for renewable and infrastructure, as well as to provide adequate staff and technical assistance at all government levels, because we really need to invest in public administration officers. And the second recommendation is the opportunity to maximize renewable energy generation per euro spent. The second topic I want to focus on is final consumption electrification for residential sector. And again, I will highlight a couple of IEA recommendations I agree with: maximize energy savings per euro spent again, and strengthen energy security. So regarding the first topic, how renewable development is going, during the last 2 years, things are doing better indeed. Over the period 2014-2021, the average growth of PV and wind power plants was less than 1 gigawatt per year, while in 2022, 3 gigawatt of new renewable power plants were installed, and other 3.2 gigawatt only in the first 7 months of 2023 entered into operation, and an additional 6 gigawatt of power plants, utility scale, that have already obtained the permitting are expected in the coming months. So this is good news, but at the same time, we cannot declare that the new installed RES capacity still consists for a relevant percentage of rooftop and small-scale PV power system. So I come to one of IEA recommendation again, so simplifying permitting procedures, because what is going on is a clear clue that the slowness of permitting procedures is still a problem for renewable development, because rooftop PV is still a relevant percentage, and this is a bit weird since considering the cost of installation and the different hours of irradiation, rooftop PV costs up to 5 or 6 times more than utility scale PV. And so again, I come to the other IEA recommendation, which is indeed to push for more efficient solution. Moving to the second point I want to focus on, which is electrification of consumption for residential sector. Especially if combined with renewable development, electrification really represents our chance to decarbonize the economy, except for the hard-to-abate sector, of course, as well as to achieve more livable cities, increase our energy independence, and reduce energy prices. it has become essential to push for a fast rollout of heat pumps. It is estimated that replacing 1.2 million domestic gas boilers with heat pumps would reduce the Italian gas consumption of about 1 BCM per year, if the additional electricity demand was met through renewable sources and storage. But even in the worst case, assuming that this additional electricity demand was met entirely by gas generation, we would still have net savings of about half BCM per year. And this is clearly in line with another IEA recommendation regarding the necessity to maximize energy savings per euro spent and to strengthen energy security and independence. To conclude, let me share a very final consideration. Since mid-2021, we have been experiencing supply shortage and price increase of energy commodities. Energy prices are still now much higher than the normality we were familiar with before COVID. European and global natural gas markets are not yet out of the process of the price spikes created by the consumption rebound after the pandemic and Russia's cuts. Therefore, gas market tensions and prices volatility are still a problem that could even get worse in the coming years. Global gas demand is expected to increase, in fact, in the short and medium term, mainly due to coal power plants phase out. The last World Energy Outlook highlights an increase of gas demand to 2030 of about 120 BCM in Asia Pacific, in the Asia Pacific region, and 120 BCM in Middle East region. Even if for Europe it is foreseen a reduction of 110 BCM, the net increase of the demand will have further impacts on the market and the relative gas prices. So, considering also this additional reason, it becomes of utmost importance for advanced economy, for Italy, for European Union to reduce even faster fossil fuel consumption, prompting renewable and electrification. But by the way, at the end of the day, I'm optimistic about it. Renewable are cheaper, electrification is cheaper, and this is there are no national reasons for not to go ahead quickly. And yeah, this was my final consideration.
Thank you very much, Fabio, to give some, confirming some of the numbers about the pace of development of renewable-based generation and also the type of renewable-based generation installation that we see in Italy. Now we move to Claudio Squeglia, as I said, from ENI, the international energy conglomerate based in Italy. Claudio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alberto, and I wish to thank the Foreign School of Regulation and the International Energy Agency for inviting me to this interesting webinar. I have just a couple of quick comments about the topic of this webinar, energy crisis and climate targets from a policy perspective. I think we need to keep these two issues distinguished because and separate, because they are very different in terms of effort and in terms of policy. I think that during the energy crisis, we as a country, Italy, did really well. In that moment, what we need to do, and which was not easy, of course, but was just to secure energy supply, avoid blackouts from energy for consumers. So find new energy sources and suppliers, and somehow shield consumers, both residential consumers and industrial consumers, from price spikes. And we did great in this sense. There was a big effort from government and from companies and from many players in the energy field who helped in this sense. But this is a completely different story when we come to policies for the climate targets. Mostly because when you have to, during the energy crisis, what we need was to secure energy supply. When we come to climate targets, it's a very long-term journey which needs to balance and reconcile the three goals of every energy policy. That is to say, not only security of supply, but also energy affordability and the goal of decarbonization. The idea that the energy crisis accelerated the transition, the energy transition, is to me somehow a comforting idea, but I believe it falls into the scope of wishful thinking more than into the scope of reality. The reality is that during the emergency, we spent huge amounts of public money to protect all consumers from the price spikes, not only the vulnerable ones, but all the consumers from price spikes, which is something that is not sustainable from a public finance perspective and from an incentive to energy consumption perspective as well. The reality is also that to secure energy supply, we maximize the use of coal, which I think is something I don't need to underline how harmful this is for the environment. So in that moment, we needed to do so, and we did great. But when it comes to the future and to climate targets, I think we have to recover a more broad view on our goals. And to summarize, what I think we should recover is the concept of efficiency. When I say efficiency, I don't only mean energy efficiency, which, by the way, is one of the few directions and policies which maximizes the three dimensions of energy policies: affordability, decarbonization, and security of supply. To me, efficiency means also efficiency in public spending, which must be selective and should target vulnerable customers and not all customers. But efficiency also means the choice should be declined in the choice of the energy mix, which means applying a principle of technology neutrality to the choice of the mix, which means minimizing the cost per ton of CO2, of abated CO2, and not picking up in advance which technology should we adopt to pursue the energy transition. And efficiency, in conclusion, is also something which has to do with public procedures. For example, permitting in new plans. We have seen during the emergency all the problems we had with localizing a new LNG infrastructure, but the same is true for renewables plant and for every energy infrastructure. As the review states, the elephant in the room has a lot to do with authorization processes and even public acceptance of energy infrastructure. When we ask to the general public, to public opinion, do you think Italy should fight climate change? Of course, everyone says, yes, I think Italy should fight climate change. But the situation is much different when we ask to localize and to host energy infrastructure. I think this is a big hurdle for this country. And this is something on which public and private sector should try to work together with more strength and a bigger effort. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Claudia. Thank you for your perspective. Thanks a lot also to the audience who has submitted a number of questions. Clara, there were some specific questions on the Italian schemes. I guess you answered them in the chat because they have disappeared, right?
I answered one. I'm not sure.
We are
Maybe
too
there was
connected.
another question on how I didn't answer that one, on how works I think the connection between the bill and
exactly.
And, okay. I tried to answer, but maybe to make it short. Of course, families and citizens, they have to ask for public support of any type. So they have to submit a request to the National Institute for Social Security. And that's a general approach. So if you need support for your children, for paying for your books, you need to, for the schooling, you need to do that. So the standard in Italy. So you go there and you give all the information and you get back your index, the value of your index. So once the value of the index is assessed, there is an internal governance in Italy where that information is sent to a company that is in charge of collecting and keeping the database of all consumers. So all the info are there. There is a check if the poor family, sorry if I'm just making it short, if the family need has a contract, and in case that this company sends the information to the retailer saying that there is a need, the retailer needs to add the bonus in the bill, and the retailer, of course, receives the money that has given to the consumer. That's in a nutshell, but there are documents, if you are interested, where the process is described in much more detail.
Thank you very much, Clara. And then, I mean, if I were to summarize the different questions that we got in the Q&A facility, I think I can do it sort of with three questions. The first one is a specific one, which is the importance for Italy of the EU ETS system in meeting the climate targets, and whether there are specific decarbonization challenges which Italy has, which the EU-wide scheme won't be able to address. So that's the first question. I will then ask each of you to either answer all of them or focus on one of them. So the first one is on the role of the ETS in Italy, whether it's an important role, or there are other challenges which a European scheme cannot cover. The second one is going back to what I think has been one of the main theme of the presentation so far, is the difficulties of developing the right kind of renewable-based generation. And if we compare it with Germany, for example, Italy seems to be, at least this is what is portrayed in the question, much slower. And so, you know, what measures are necessary, and whether the fact that Italy will hold the presidency of the G7 in 2024 should be an opportunity of, you know, try to improve and having a solution to this. And the third question is about the network, and what are the impact on the Italian power network with so much generation connected, and which kind of flexibility, what are the resources which can provide flexibility, and what are the costs? In other countries, this is a major issue. So these are the three questions for the first round, and perhaps I can start again with Alessio, then Clara, and then our three panelists, maybe in reverse order. So Claudia, Fabio, and Julia. Yep. Okay, so Alessio, I don't know whether you want to address these three questions, or which one of them you want to address.
Thank you. We were discussing with Silvio, who's also in the room, a bit about the answers here. Very interesting questions. Thank you. And thanks to all the panelists who are online for their very insightful interventions. Very nice to hear recommendations mentioned, and many themes resounded very good. No, on the three questions, maybe we can say something on about the EU ETS system and the role in Italy. Of course, that the EU ETS is important, is helping a lot. We saw the decrease of emissions from the electricity sector and sectors covered by ETS since 2005 has been strong. Coal phase out has also been helped by ETS prices. But of course, that's not covering all the sectors, even with the new update. So for sure, Italy needs to put on policies to, especially for the sector that are not covered by EU ETS. But so, for example, transport is the biggest one, as highlighted before. So and there are methane was mentioned before as well. Biomethane indeed is a very important solution for Italy, where there is some advantage that the industry is there and can be further incentivized. Hydrogen, I didn't mention, of course, is a solution for the future, maybe farther along than biomethane. And indeed, even carbon neutrality, of course, is important of course, the end goal is to decrease emissions. There are some technologies that are more mature than others and are helping worldwide a lot. So, I mean, that's, of course, should be taken into consideration, I think. But in the end, yeah, so the EU ETS helps. It's not enough. So the Italian government should think about complementary policies. And even in the electricity sector, we have seen that ETS is not enough alone to, for example, accelerate permitting. There are like always some parallel actions that the government has to do in the energy sector. Renewable deployment, I mean, we study all member countries. We do these reviews of all member countries, and we are always amazed comparing one with another. And indeed, when you see the installed capacity of solar in Germany and you compare it with Italy, there is always a bit of surprise. And so that is true. Germany has pushed on that for longer. And we saw that in Italy there was this acceleration in 2011, all the issues that followed, and then stagnation. So I think now Italy is really picking up very promising numbers from Fabio from Terna on recent developments, utility scale. But indeed, rooftop and households is still lacking behind. And there are interesting schemes around in Europe and in the world. Greece recently had a very effective scheme providing subsidies and especially to households to install the solar rooftop, and also connecting the subsidies to the installation of batteries and storage. So kind of balancing the distributed generation already at the consumer level, which is important from the distribution grid perspective as well. Maybe not exactly fitting all this question, but on something that has been mentioned before on flexibility and the test cases that are being done and are interesting. Also, we should say that Italy has a very high penetration of smart meters, and that's actually something that Italy should be commended for. Now we are in the rollout of second generation smart meters. Some countries are still behind on the first generation, so that's great, but it's not that used much. So I think regulations, policies that help consumer use electricity when it's better for the system should be a very good example. We were discussing about an example in Denmark where consumers on their app can see the real-time price of electricity and decide whether to run their washing machine or something, I mean, charge your EV. And so I think there is a lot of potential. It's challenging. We know it's not just like that to be done. We're also managing this large amount of data coming from smart meters is not easy. When we were home, we talked with Terna about that as well. But I think it's an opportunity that Italy has and should leverage because as we go forward, we will inevitably have more distributed generation, more issues for distribution grids, and this is one of the solutions that really needs to be tackled. On the power network, maybe I will really leave it to Terna, who is the best probably to answer specific questions on that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot, Alessio. Clara, any thought on the question?
Just a few remarks on my side. Of course, I don't know what the importance of ETS for Italy is, but I can tell you that I think the efficient pricing system of our electricity market has helped transferring and giving transparency to the value of CO2 and of ETS permitting. So this is something that we should preserve the way it works now. On the renewables, and for sure we need to increase, to accelerate. And I think storage is going to play a very relevant role. We are working to have, the government has proposed to submit it to the European Commission a scheme to develop technology neutral mechanism, market-based, to develop storage. I think that could help a lot because I believe personally that a centralized market, a market-based approach could be more effective than individual incentives to deploy individual batteries. So we hope the bureaucracy, the European procedures won't take too long, because sometimes for capacity markets or the state aids procedure anyway are very long, and we do not have time. We are in a hurry to proceed with our transition. On the role of customers and the flexibility at distribution level, I think when we look at that, we have to take into consideration that Italian consumers, they consume very little. And that's an historical fact. The average consumption for a house for electricity is now 2,000 kilowatt hours a year. So it's much lower than most European countries. So activating Italian households on managing their consumption is not as easy, even if they have the tools, even if we are going to overcome a load profile for everybody. So we are trying to help the market to make available tools. But what we see is that the market is not there yet, at least. On the networks and again on flexibility, as I said before, we decided to launch pilot projects, and we are in a learning process, if you want. Now we are learning at distribution level. So we have pilot projects that have been launched, some others are under study. It's important, and we make the results available to everybody, because we want to understand how to do it, but we want to ensure, again, a technology neutral approach here as well. That's very important to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. I would now move to actually Claudia, but before doing that, I was wondering whether Ilaria wants to add any additional question for the three panelists.
Not right now. Let's see. Okay. Let's continue.
Let's continue. Okay, thanks. So Claudia, Fabio, and then Giulia.
Thank you for the question. I think EU ETS is the main measure for Europe for the decarbonization of the European economy. It is the pillar on which our decarbonization is based, and is the single main instrument we have to decarbonize our economies. So, of course, it's really important. The point is that EU ETS, which is very good in terms of mechanism, which is technological, neutral, and efficient in its functioning, doesn't cover all sectors of the energy sector. What worries me are other pieces of legislation EU is approving, which seems to have an approach one size fits all, and which seem to have in mind a mix, an energy mix, which is the same for every country and for every sector. Sectors are different, countries are different, have different resources on which they can build their future. And in this sense, I think that we should, as I said before, I think that we should have a technology neutral approach to our choice of the energy mix. We should have an approach which distinguishes between different segments inside the same sector. For example, the transport sector, in which some segment is easy to electrify, while, for example, heavy transports are not easy to electrify. The same for industry. There are hard to abate sectors which you can't electrify. You can't find in wind and solar the solution which is good for every sector of your economy. So I think that the right way to pursue a real decarbonization which doesn't punish our economies is allowing more technologies, more options, more technology solutions inside our mix. And when I say more, I intend biomethane, hydrogen, CCUS, nuclear, biofuels, e-fuels, and even the technologies that we don't have in our options today, but that we may have in the near future. So a mechanism like EU ETS works well in this sense. Doesn't pick up a technology, doesn't pick up the mix of the future, but gives a price to emissions, which is something which works well to me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claudia. Then Fabio.
Yes, here we are. So I will go through some of the questions. Regarding permitting, now I want to just to tell you that quite recently I made a meeting with some renewable developer in order to ask them. It's not my job, of course, to obtain and to manage permitting procedures for renewable. I'm not an expert, but I wanted to better understand. So what was their problem? So I asked for a meeting for a meeting with them, and because I was eager to better understand, to learn what were their main problems. And the main answer was indeed to invest in public administration. So to help public administration officer to do their job, because we are underestimating indeed their difficulties in managing this request, and the responsibility that they take over themselves in order to manage this issue. So the main answer was to invest in public administration, and indeed this was one of the IA recommendations. So for this reason, I want to highlight. Of course, there are some specific measures that can be implemented, but maybe it's not worth to be too specific. About power system with more and more renewables connected. My opinion is that this, in the medium term, is an issue a bit overestimated, let me say. We are definitely working for a power system fully relying on renewables. Of course, we will need to understand how to get new resources in terms of frequency regulation, in terms of voltage regulation, in terms of inertia. Of course, we will need to to learn how to get more inertia to get the inertia from
Anastrini, EUI, FSR. Images. Places. News.
Sorry, I guess that there is some microphone open. Okay, so what I can say is that during 2022 and 2023, in the last 18 months, we were managing a system with more than 6 gigawatt of PV in the power system, and at the same time we spent less and less money in the dispatching service market. So I guess that this is a clue that we can manage. Of course, we need investment in order to a different kind of network management regarding frequency regulation, regarding voltage regulation, regarding in particular inertia. I guess that these were the 2 main questions from my side.
Thank you very much, Fabian. And apologies, I think it was my laptop that came to life, and
okay. Never mind.
Speaking about the UI, I don't know why. Okay, last but not least, Julia, your take on these questions.
Sure. I'll try to be brief. So on the first one on ETS, on whether there is any specifics in Italy that makes it more difficult to achieve, right? Because the EU ETS has just been reformed, new sectors have been included, and so on. So and the ambitions have increased. So what I think. First one is that the introduction of the Register of Guarantees of Origin, there was a decree before the summer in Italy, makes things much easier, because it basically allows the sectors that are subject to the ETS to purchase guarantees of origins for biomethane in the future, for hydrogen, to offset their obligations. And that makes it a lot easier. Another aspect, going back to a bit to sort of policy elements that was raising before, is around how blending will be treated as applied to the ETS, and not only to the ETS, also to the quota obligations that are stemming from the RED. And this is because it's already relevant in Italy, because the biggest potential, the most efficient renewable deployed in southern Italy, and demand, and especially talking about demand which is subject to the ETS, is in the north. So if it was made clear that EU ETS obligations were with guarantees of origin of blended gases, blended hydrogen in particular, that would make things better. Otherwise, I mean, clearly we're talking about some sectors that are hard to decarbonize, and there are limited options to decarbonize this sector. So given Italy, it is true that is a bit of a challenge, but potentially these challenges can be sorted out through regulation. And second question, third, I'm gonna merge them. Second was around how you deploy the right amount, and I suppose, I mean, taking something that Claudia mentioned before, the sort of right sources of renewable energy, because it doesn't necessarily need to be a renewable power.
I think we might have lost.
We lost Julia. Yes.
The connection, yes, with Julia. I think she abruptly disappeared. Well, apologies for that. Maybe she will be able to reconnect. In any case, we're getting to the end. Ilaria, I don't know. We still have time for a final round, and
yes.
I would like to cover sort of energy poverty, but maybe you have another question you want to pose to our panelists and speakers.
Well, I was actually I was listening with great attention, because I think many interesting points were raised, and I was also particularly intrigued by the some of the data presented by IEA, and I was observing that on one slide, natural gas seems to be still like predominant in demand for buildings in Italy. And I was wondering whether we had seen recently any change, even like, small change in this trend, which is, as we know, a traditional, it's just a tradition in Italy. Buildings have been fueled by gas for decades. And if it's anything comparable to what has been happening recently, for example, in Germany, with a huge increase of demand for heat pumps, for example. So I was missing a bit this information, but maybe after Julia, because I see that Julia is back. So let's let her finish.
I'm sorry, I got cut down at the moment where I was saying I'm not going to repeat myself. I'm not going to repeat myself. On the levers for green molecules. But one thing I wanted to say in relation to flexibility is that hydrogen could be one of the levers of flexibility to the electricity system. So in terms of charging, one thing that could helpfully be done is to sort of electricity charging I'm talking about. So when electrolyzers withdraw electricity from the grid, so the sort of electricity treatment ideally would need to be levered with the other sources of flexibility. So this is an additional perspective I wanted to make in terms of how you can promote the right renewable sources, how you can promote electricity to flexibility, to the electricity systems. Apologies for cutting off.
No problem. Welcome back, Alessio. On the use of, on the future consumption or energy consumption of buildings and whether how much it can be electrified. We can't hear you at the moment.
So yeah, sorry. On the electrification of buildings, and demand is of course important, and that's where a lot of gas is going. I think some preliminary data did show decrease of consumption including of gas in 2022 and 23. This was linked to higher prices and some reactions from sectors, even in the residential sector, so lower use. I think electrification is starting to happen, but my impression from data, I don't have the exact data point for Italy on hand, but the IEA has published a detailed report on heat pumps last year. We have a report on everything apart. And there are numbers, including for Italy, but I'm quite, here is it. Sorry, but I was looking at it now. I see 350,000 heat pump installed in 2021, which is actually quite high and even higher than Germany, but that was for 2021. I think that now many countries are picking up, and I had this feeling that Italy was lagging slightly behind, but I might be wrong, so I don't quote myself on that. But indeed, this is something that is booming in any case in Europe, and it's a key way to decarbonize and to electrify the sector. And indeed, in Italy, it's even more important because of the high share of gas. Of course, there are challenging, and we were discussing now with Silvia about the recent scheme in Germany that has encountered challenges in approval and how it was received by consumers. So the preparation of these policies should be done carefully and broadly consulted, and not to have a counter effect to basically then lose the public support on climate change and on the concrete actions. As Claudia was mentioning before, of course, everyone is agreed to take on climate change, but then when it comes to specific actions, it's a bit more delicate. So policies need to be well designed, and experience from other countries, including Germany, UK, they are all trying to support heat pumps and decarbonization. So I think Italy should closely follow these and learn from development of neighboring countries.
Thank you, Alessio. Maybe we should ask the same question, but only for a 30-second answer. And I know it's almost an impossible task, to our panelists. What is the future for the decarbonization of the building sector? Because the other sectors, I think more or less the path is, well, not clear, but at least, one can envisage a path. But for, would it a complete electrification of the building sector? Is it feasible in Italy, or is it more complex? So maybe Giulia, Fabio, and Claudia.
I have a full electric house, so.
Okay, well then you've answered. It's possible.
Possible.
So I believe it's possible. There are exceptions. These exceptions are also recognized in legislation. The Energy Efficiency Directive sets out a number of conditions that I think in Italy would apply, quite extensively in relation to the sort of potential historical and other type of constraints protection that some certain buildings are subject to. So of course it is possible to make progress, but let's not forget that also green molecules can help decarbonizing buildings where electrification solutions are impossible.
Okay.
Yes, to me, the residential sector is not the one that we have to imagine as a difficult sector to electrify. I think it is not so difficult. Anyway, we have different possible solutions for decarbonization of the residential sector. Biomethane is a very good answer for the residential sector. And what is important to do is to let's say, incentivize efficiency in the residential sector, because there is very big room for efficiency gains in this sector, I think.
Yeah, no.
Alberto, may I add just an info? Maybe that can be useful for only this issue. What we have seen is that if you are serious about electrifying the heating, for example, of final uses inside buildings, you have to address the issue of old grids in the building behind the meter. So it's something that regulator, for us, it's very difficult to address. It's not our competence. We have tried some incentive mechanism to help buildings to do that and to agree. But that's very difficult, but that's something that is necessary. That's a missing piece, I could say.
Excellent point, Clara, indeed. I mean, this is something, as you said, is beyond regulation. So there is an issue about dealing with the grids, before the meters, the public grids, and then there is an issue of the internal grids, internal network within buildings, which probably was not conceived to support consumption of, full consumption by households. I think we're getting to the end. I don't know, Ilaria, whether you have a final word before we thank the speakers.
Sure. I mean, as usual, I would like to thank everybody because it was a very, very interesting debate. I think, well, as usual, drawing conclusions is always difficult, but I think we all learned that Italy is facing some important challenges, both as a response to the energy crisis and also in relation to the decarbonization targets. In this, it's no different from any other country in Europe. But it's also true that each country has some peculiarities, so those cannot be neglected or underestimated. We heard about permitting and bureaucracy. We heard about maybe old buildings that are more difficult to modernize with heating systems, and etc. So, and other countries have probably other different issues. But we also learned, understood that Italy has been doing its part in trying to cope very well with, or at its best with these difficulties. And so I think the IEA report also underlines this very clearly. And so I would like really to thank IEA in particular for co-organizing this debate, Alessio and Silvia for being our knowledge partners on this important topic, and of course also all the other speakers, Clara Poletti, Giulia Branzi, Fabio Bulgarelli, and Claudia Squeglia, and of course my co-host Alberto Potocznik for moderating the debate greatly as usual. Alberto, you have the final word.
Very well. My final word is to thank you for having masterminded this debate, and last but not least to thank Chiara behind the scene, without whom none of this would have been possible. We will be back on screen in 4 weeks' time, and the next episode of our FSR debate, the ones hosted by Ilaria and myself, will be on the role of DSOs in the process towards net zero. So thanks a lot for your attention. Thanks for the audience for their questions, and thank you to them, and see you in 4 weeks' time, if not earlier on.
Indeed. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.